Human apes are kind of strange creatures if you think about it. We walk about the world thinking we understand ourselves and other people pretty well, that we understand the content of the world pretty well. That is, of course, the evolutionary trick that our brain plays on us. It tells us that we understand things because the things that we do need to understand in our immediate environment are more than sufficient. And so, too, does this come into play when we think of relationships. Let's think about something, just really briefly. Do you think most people, above all normies, and I'm using the term normie in the old sense, this looks-maxing, black pill term normie to describe someone of average looks, I never use it that way. There was some confusion recently because somebody made a response video and he thought I was using normie in the black pill sense. No, normie in the mental, emotional, world perspective sense. In any event, above all normies, do you think normies really think a lot about why they enter into relationships? They don't. And that's perfectly normal. They're just drawn to them. Men and women are, in air quotes, drawn to each other, or so we're told. But the thing is, the reason why we're drawn to each other, that is men and women, has very good evolutionary grounding, which is to say, reproduction. But most people, these days especially, and that was actually something that was rather starkly borne in mind in previous eras, prior to birth control, prior to everything. Part of it was due to the fact that sexual encounters could very easily result in a pregnancy, an unwanted pregnancy, and that was a condition devoutly to be avoided. But yes, when people enter in relationships these days, it's more or less a kind of, let's just see what happens. Oh, I like this dude, the woman says. The guy says, oh, she's hot. Why not? Relationships in the current meta, in the current year, are, to a large extent, extremely dysfunctional. In fact, I've had multiple encounters over the last few years with a certain individual, and I'm actually friends with a individual whose relationship, actually it's a marriage in his case because he is married, is exceptionally functional, but exceptions prove the rule. I am blown away by how functional his relationship is and how well it works. I was kind of the canary in the coal mine for him, letting him know that he was the exception, as was his wife. Because at the end of the day, we all live in our own heads, and sometimes it's difficult to break out of that prison of our own heads. And he spent some time thinking, okay, do I know other relationships? Do I know other people? Yeah. And he thought, what a bloody mess these things are. And yeah, the number of highly functional relationships I'm aware of, and obviously it's just anecdotal, people say below 40, or certainly below 30, I can count on one hand, and it's not even all the fingers on that hand. So, yeah, relationships are pretty dysfunctional. Let me tell you the secret, I think, as to why certain relationships work, very few, and others, the majority, don't. And this goes back to my earlier point about the evolutionary grounding about why people engage in this. Well, yeah, there's the natural attraction that men and women might feel to each other, although these days I'm becoming increasingly skeptical that women are attracted to men at all on some level. But nonetheless, women and men are in some way drawn to each other. But it's ultimately always for reproduction. What is the basis and the grounding for a modern relationship, say, for a 20-something-year-old these days? It's basically, he's cool, she's hot, let's just hang out and enjoy these fuzzy-wuzzy feelings of euphoria, maybe being a little bit in love, and let's just wait for the fuzzy-wuzzy feelings to fizzle out. That's basically what it is these days. The vast majority of relationships are just, yeah, it's like, I really like him, and the guy says, oh, she's really good at sucky-wucky, and she's pretty hot, and at least she's tolerable, so why not? There's no long-term goal, right? And part of that long-term goal, frankly speaking, is the idea of reproduction. Now, surprise, surprise, this friend of mine with a highly functional relationship / marriage, he and his wife are planning on having at least 2 children. And when you're planning on having children, other things fall into place a lot more easily. Does it help that both of them are extremely intelligent, as an IQ 140 plus? Sure, that helps a lot, obviously. But the idea of being organized, the idea of planning steps, saving up a certain amount of money to buy a certain type of domicile for your offspring, blah, 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 that sort of thing, right? Very, very methodical. But the reason why they're together isn't just to be together. And that, of course, is the reason why a lot of people are in relationships, but rather to have offspring at the end of the day. And so you're probably familiar with the concept of having skin in the game. A lot of people will talk about this in the case of having offspring, that these individuals tend to have more skin in the game because they have offspring. And that's true to some degree. But that's also true in a relationship. The relationship itself between a man and a woman could be a manifestation of skin in the game. Do you have skin in the game with respect to the relationship? And most of the time that has to do with wanting to have offspring, wanting to reproduce. Most relationships, you can just observe them, are just fuzzy-wuzzy, oh, it's kind of cool to hang out, sucky-wucky, waiting until the feelings of euphoria die out, and they inevitably will die out. They always die out. That's just the way of things. And then, when these feelings have died out, there's nothing to buttress the relationship anymore. It's just, oh, wow, now we're fighting, but there's no long-term goal. Disagreements, arguments, what have you, all of these can be more easily, not entirely, but more easily set aside if you have the long-term goal of reproduction in a relationship, if you have skin in the game of the relationship. Now, of course, there are probably just statistically some anomalies out there of people who don't want children but nonetheless have highly functional relationships that are methodically planned out or at least just very stable. I don't doubt that. Statistically, they would have to exist. They're just quite rare. Most of them are not like that. Most of them are just sucky-wucky, ooh, I feel so good, I feel so good, I don't feel so good anymore, goodbye. And that desire to work through problems, right? I think a lot of it has to do with the desire to reproduce and actually follow through on that. Now, of course, I should add a very major caveat here, and that is we all know that plenty of children are the children of divorcees. So just because you have children doesn't mean that you will not get divorced. But again, in the case of well-intentioned, intelligent people like this couple I've been referring to, I think the chances are much more likely. They don't fight a lot. When they do have disagreements, they talk it out. It's just very, very functional, extremely rare. I don't think it's going to be available to the majority of people. One, because these two individuals are hyper-intelligent, certain personality traits, etc., etc. So there's no real guarantee. However, I have to emphasize that that idea of skin in the game in the relationship, something other than meandering about in a relationship, just hoping that things are okay, until one person, usually a woman, decides that she doesn't have these butterflies in her stomach anymore and then ends it. Yeah, that's the state of relationships these days. People want to know why they're not working out, why they're also dysfunctional. There's no end goal. There's no telos. It's whatever. Now, again, it is possible, even without children, to have some kind of telos in a relationship, but that's not how they work typically. And ultimately, I think this is probably the major contributing factor as to why relationships are dysfunctional and just don't work out most of the time these days. Young people enter into them, they're aimless, they have no long-term goals, they don't have the goal of reproduction, they just want to hang out, have fun, and when the fun ends, so too does the relationship. Okay, fair enough, you move on to the next one. Eventually that cycle ends because, everyone gets older, they lose their appeal, etc., and it just doesn't work out anymore. Now, to the young people, I'm not saying go out and have kids. By no means. Do what you want to do. It's your life. I'm just saying that taking some time to think about why you want a relationship, and this certainly includes black pillars and even incels who don't necessarily have access to it or may never have access to it. What is the reason? Is it just for the sucky-wucky, etc., companionship, just hanging out? Okay, but that's not sustainable long term. And there seems to be a lot of anecdotal evidence, to be sure, but a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that it's not. Something to think about. Maybe not for the normies, because normies, as a rule, don't think about these things. But something to think about nonetheless. Because I think we're going to see more and more and more dysfunctionality in human relationships between men and women as time goes on. And I think this is going to be a big part of it. Again, no guarantee just because you want to have kids that it's going to work out necessarily. But at the very least, you're working towards something. I'm not endorsing that necessarily. I'm just describing a phenomenon I can observe here. Anyway, as always, thanks for tuning in. Please leave a like, comment, share, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.